This playthrough is rated T for teen.
Chapter 3, Phantom Woman, Los Angeles, December 20th, 1980, 11 a.m. With no need to get out of bed in any particular hurry, Hyde spent the best part of the morning drifting in and out of sleep as the familiar hum of traffic continued faintly in the background. The telephone started ringing, but even reaching out to pick up the receiver seemed like too much work for him today. At last, he lethargically stretched his arm across the bed. "Morning, handsome." It was Rachel. Her dulcet tones could be heard loud and clear through the receiver. "Do you still feel like working for Red Crown?" Having just woken up, Hyde wasn't in the mood for any games. He had never felt any particular attachment to the salesman gig, but losing it had left him with a growing sense of helplessness that made him feel very uneasy. "You don't think the old man's beginning to regret firing me, do you?" Suddenly, Ed's boomy voice was assaulting Hyde's ears. "Firing you must have messed with my head. I had this really strange dream where you were lying dead by the roadside." Hyde could just picture the scene on the other end with Ed forcibly grabbing the receiver from Rachel's hand. And yet the words that kept spilling out of Ed seemed so uncharacteristic of him. "Waking up with this image in my head has got me genuinely worried something might happen to you, Hyde." Ed being worried about him was unexpected enough, but it didn't end there. "How about it? If you want to work for Red Crown again, I'll give you one last chance." Hyde replied that he truly did want his job back. He meant every word. Hearing that, Ed commented that he would have to find some way for Hyde to prove it, and then passed the phone back to Rachel. "Feeling more awake now?" she asked in a playful tone. Did Ed believe me when I said I wanted to work for him again? What's he going to make me do to prove it? And will he ever stop being so angry at me? A million thoughts were running through Hyde's mind. Above all, though, he was grateful to Ed for giving him another chance, no matter how slim. It'll be nice if things look a little less bleak by the time Christmas rolls around. Rachel told Hyde that she'd do everything she could to help him get his job back. Hearing that made the world seem a little bit brighter. I guess I should tell her about what happened. Hyde explained his encounter with Rex Foster from the previous day. When he had met the man in Lucky's cafe, everything about him seemed fishy. Hyde asked Rachel to see if she could dig up any information about him that might shed some more light on the whole situation. Rachel's sleuthing abilities were impressive, even to a former cop like Hyde. She always seemed to know exactly which avenues to search down and to find all the information she needed. It helped to know something about the guy, at least. It was probably all that work talk with Ed that got him feeling wide awake all of a sudden. As soon as he was finished talking to Rachel, he said about his daily routine. He put on his suit just as though he was heading out to work, even if it did mean he was all dressed up with nowhere to go. Then came an unexpected buzz at the door. His Mags. A rare treat indeed. She was there to demand his overdue rent, but Hyde saw it as the perfect opportunity to ask about what Sydney had told him about the previous day. He decided to phrase it as he had simply overheard something about an incident 13 years ago. Upon hearing this, Mag's initial reaction was to feign ignorance. "Whatever could you be referring to?" Persistent as always, Hyde asked again. "Oh, that," she finally said as it was nothing. "Mr. Hyde, I thought you'd know better than to pay attention to the idle gossip and rumors. Now about your rent." Mags remained cold as ever. As soon as she had reminded him of his promise to pay up, she was at the door. "Gotta pay my rent. Gotta pay my rent." The same few words, obvious as they were, kept repeating over and over in his head. Hyde felt like a pathetic excuse for a man. He'd lost his job, was about to lose his home, and on top of it all, he somehow had to scrape together enough cash to pay the rent. "I'm sure I've got $400 left in my bank account." But that line of thinking hit a snag when he realized it was Saturday, so the bank would be closed. Hyde cursed his own bad luck. His only remaining option was to search every corner of his apartment to see if he could muster up enough cash. He was interrupted by the buzzer again. This time it was Tony's charming visage that greeted Hyde. "This is something you're going to want to hear, Hyde," he began, his face a picture of excitement and glee. Tony explained that he'd found a get-rich-quick scheme that couldn't fail. No effort required, no risk involved, and in no time at all, you'll have 10 times the amount of money you put in. 10 times? Thought Hyde. Something's not quite right about this. Naturally, Tony didn't have enough money to fund the venture himself, so he inquired as to whether Hyde wanted in. You don't have a problem with me using some of your money on this, do you?" he asked in an air of presumption in his voice. At that moment, the phone started ringing again. Hyde would have wanted no part of this even if he did have the money to spare. He gently encouraged Tony to be on his way. "My phone's ringing," Hyde growled. "I really should answer it." Tony's smile faded. "You know, man, I'm in a tight spot, and I really need your support right now." What does he mean, a tight spot? Despite Tony's protestations, Hyde left him waiting while he answered the phone. It was Mags again. How could the situation possibly get any worse, he wondered. "I forgot to mention this earlier, so I'd like to say that I'd like the rent paid in full by the end of the day." That was how. Hyde couldn't help but laugh to himself, or at least he thought it was to himself. From behind him, Tony commented, "That was Megs on the phone just now. I noticed how you were speaking." Damn, I almost forgot he was still here. When she wants something from you, there's no stopping her. She was on the phone to me not long back, as Tony continued. His words rapidly became a sob story. "If I don't strike it rich with this deal, I'm never going to sell the rent." What deal? He quickly realized that the get-rich-quick scheme Tony had spoken about earlier was just a gambling scheme of some kind. So much for no risk involved. Hyde was stunned by Tony's audacity, and without even meaning to, he raised his voice quite noticeably. "You think I'm going to lend you cash out of my own pocket just like that? Maybe you should try working for your money." Perhaps not expecting Hyde to react with such vitriol, Tony left with his tail between his legs. But with Tony gone, his real problems were staring him in the face once again. Gonna have to look for a new place, not to mention find some petty cash pretty fast. Hyde was in the habit of putting any spare change in his pockets into an empty whiskey bottle he kept on top of the chest of drawers in his room. He picked up the bottle and turned it upside down, then counted all the coins that fell out. Some bills were stuffed inside too, but no amount of shaking would get them out. He just had to find some way to break the bottle. Hyde searched for a tool he might be able to use to break the bottle, but he couldn't seem to find anything. The most obvious solution seemed to be a hammer, but he didn't have one. All of a sudden, however, someone sprang to mind. Who might? Dylan. Dylan was a handyman by trade, so he undoubtedly had all kinds of tools at his disposal. Hyde decided he would go and ask Dylan if he could borrow a hammer. Dylan was surprised at the sudden visit, but when Hyde explained that he needed a favor, he invited him in his room. Hyde was careful not to say that it was all in aid of paying his rent. Instead, he simply explained that he had accidentally dropped something important to him in a bottle, and the only way to get it out was by force. With a friendly smile, Dylan said he would be happy to lend Hyde the hammer he kept in his car. He went off to get it, leaving Hyde alone in the room. While he waited, Hyde wandered idly around the room. At first, he didn't find much of interest, but then he came to a halt before a certain picture he found hanging on the wall. Up close, he could see there was actually a framed jigsaw puzzle. This picture was one he knew well. It was Osterzone's famous painting, Angel Opening a Door. Never expected to see it here. The original had once been stolen from a New York art museum by a crime syndicate, the same crime syndicate Bradley had later investigated undercover. Yes, this painting had quite the checkered past. It was a genuine surprise to find the angel staring back at him in a place like this. Hyde gently ran a finger along the dust-covered puzzle, then, without warning, "Crap, that's done it!" With a clatter, the picture fell to the ground and puzzle pieces scattered everywhere. Hyde rushed frantically to gather them all up. "Can't leave it like this. I gotta fix it before Dylan gets back." All he wanted to do was borrow a hammer. Now Dylan was going to realize he had taken the opportunity to go around manhandling his possessions, and that could sour their relationship quite dramatically. Hyde felt like he had enough problems already without this on top. He rushed to put the puzzle back together before Dylan got back and breathed a sigh of relief as he managed it just in the nick of time. "Sorry about the wait." Dylan finally returned with the hammer. Hyde thanked him and was about to return to his room, but curiosity got the better of him. "That puzzle hanging on the wall, did you put it together yourself?" he asked Dylan. "It's Osterstone's angel opening a door, right?" Dylan replied that it was, but in Hyde's estimation, it seemed like he didn't want to talk much more about this jigsaw puzzle. Hyde saw his cue to take the hammer and leave. Once he arrived back in his apartment, it was time to break open the bottle of his. To Hyde's relief, the hammer did the trick perfectly, leaving the bottle in pieces. Finally, he had the money he needed to pay his rent. He checked the time. It was 2 o'clock, which meant he could keep his promise with plenty of time to spare. He headed to Mag's room, and once there, he got straight down to business. "Sorry about the wait, I've got the money for the rent." He followed her through into her living room. In the 4 years they had lived in the building, this was the first time she had invited him in like this. Once he had paid up, Mags mentioned there was 2 other residents still behind in their rent payments. One was Tony, and the other was Mary. "So the dame who caused all that fuss about her ring hasn't been paying her rent, huh?" She explained that she sympathized with Mary's situation since her own was very similar. They were both widows that made it difficult to raise the money for these things. No sooner had she said that, however, than the conversation took a sharp left turn. Suddenly Mags was asking him if he could have a word with Tony and Mary on her behalf. All Hyde could do was stand there and nod. Mags then asked if he would like a cup of tea, since they had never really had the chance to sit down and chat properly before. At first he was reluctant, but when she said, "I hope I haven't said anything to offend you," he couldn't exactly refuse. He decided to humor her. It seemed that giving up this apartment building was sending all kinds of memories flooding back to her. While he drank his tea, Hyde listened as she began to tell him about her past. Max's husband had apparently been a jazz musician, specifically a saxophone player. If only he was still alive. She cast her eyes in the direction of a photo frame sitting on her cabinet. It held a picture of a man playing the saxophone. Hyde asked as tactfully as he could how Mags's husband had passed away. It was an accident, she replied. Just an unforeseen accident. As a change of subject, she asked him about his own family. If Hyde's mother was a widow, she wondered what happened to his father. My dad died when I was still a 9-year-old kid, he told her. He was murdered. Mags fell silent and her eyes grew wide. As he went on to explain that the killer had never been caught, she wore an expression of deepest compassion on her face, and then as if the memories of her husband had come bursting forth again, she murmured with a sigh, "If only I could switch things back to how they were 13 years ago." 13 years ago? Hyde tried asking her again about the rumor he'd heard. Is it really all just gossip about 13 years ago, I mean? She was just as cagey as before. Not only that, but she drove the message home by admonishing him not to bring up such silly rumors about her ever again. Hyde felt that the conversation run its course, so he left Max in peace. Guess I'll have to ask Sydney about it instead. Hyde stepped over to the cafe. Not a single other customer was there to overshadow the amber glow of late afternoon that swept across the floor. Claire had her very best smile out for him, just like always. "Come on in, welcome to Lucky's Cafe." After asking for today's coffee and a hamburger, he made the same request as always. "Throw in plenty of cheese and pickles, but hold the tomato, will you?" Sydney, the owner of the cafe and Claire's father, came and told her off for not remembering as usual. It was a scene that had played out many times before, but she seemed not to pay him too much mind. Regular customers didn't tell Claire their orders straight away instead of expecting her to remember what they usually had. Sydney always seemed disgruntled at having a daughter like that. It wasn't exactly conducive to working in a cafe. Sydney came over to Hyde's table. Sydney was his way of finding out if anything was actually going around town lately. To the unsociable Hyde, he seemed like a fountain of knowledge. "Could you tell me more about what you said yesterday?" he asked. "You know, about the incident from 13 years ago." But despite this attempt to find out more, Sydney stubbornly insisted on maintaining his silence. As far as he was concerned, he had nothing more to say on the matter. "It's not exactly good for business making it public that a murder happened here," he said. Hyde knew he was right. It even explained Mags's secretiveness about the whole affair. "You have to understand that she put everything in the running of this place," Sydney explained. "She took a business on by herself and has had her fair share of troubles. I didn't want to add to them, so I agreed to keep this incident to myself." Then he expressed his terrible regret for slipping up and mentioning it to Hyde, and urged him to simply forget all about it. Seeing how much this meant to Sydney, Hyde had no choice but to drop the subject. A brief silence followed, and then out of nowhere, Sydney asked a curious question. He wanted to know if Hyde had any particular affinity for puzzles. As it happened, Hyde was rather confident on the front. Puzzles? Never had one I couldn't solve. In response, Sydney handed him a Lucky's Cafe crossword puzzle. He explained that anyone who correctly filled in the crossword would be eligible for a prize draw, and the winner would receive $1,000. Seemed like a pretty generous prize for a small local cafe. Sydney's reason for this was simply enough. He felt it would boost everyone's spirits since the entire apartment building, including his cafe, was closing down. "But it's not like it's the end for me. I'll open up somewhere else," he said, a cheerful air about him before walking away from the table. Sydney was a cafe owner through and through. Hyde definitely couldn't picture him in any other role, but that only scratched the surface of the situation. Hyde was sure this cafe had regular customers that Sydney knew and loved. It wasn't hard to imagine how Sydney must have felt about the sudden being forced to pack up and find a new location. When Hyde realized how soon this would be gone forever, this experience of just sitting in Lucky's Cafe and doing nothing in particular, just passing the time, Hyde couldn't help but be overcome by a feeling of emptiness. As he wolfed down his burger and drank his cup of coffee, Hyde decided that, for one of something better to do, he would take a look at that crossword. "I bet I'll solve this in no time." Once he had made his way back out into the lobby, a voice called out to him. "I just want to apologize for my behavior yesterday." It was Mary Rivet, the very same woman who had caused a huge commotion by accusing Tony of stealing her ring. In a muted tone, she said that she'd hoped she hadn't given him any reason to hate her. With a bitter smile, he replied bluntly that he was going too much on an easygoing guy to make a big deal out of something like that. "You're very kind," Mary said. Mary, who, up until now, had seemed to be looking at the floor, lifted her head and gazed directly into his eyes. Hyde brushed aside her compliment. All he meant, he explained, was that he didn't want to waste any more time on the matter. That set her off in a way he hadn't expected. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hyde," she said through a stream of tears. "I must be getting on your nerves." Hyde was rather flustered by this. "Seems like things are a little rough for you right now. Are you in some sort of financial trouble?" Mary admitted frankly to Hyde that she didn't have enough money to pay her rent. However, she was expecting to receive a lump sum in the near future that would cover it. She also explained that things had been tough since her husband passed away, but that talking to him had allowed her to relax and open up a little. That was why she had burst into tears like that. Not sure why I've had that effect on her. All this felt like far too much hassle for him, but There he was, regardless, taking in every word. While he was still talking to Mary, Rex came in through the front door. All of a sudden, Mary turned white as a sheet. She clammed up and left the lobby behind in a cloud of dust. Hyde glared at Rex. "What are you still doing lurking around here? I've got no business with you, Hyde," came the dismissive reply. "I just came around to pay a little visit to someone in this building." Rex's brazen attitude really got on Hyde's nerves. Hyde asked straight up who Rex was looking for, but the man wouldn't play ball. "There's just someone you have business with." And with the most cursory of goodbyes, Rex headed back to the way he came. Hyde chased after him and asked, "Is it someone who lives here?" Rex smirked as he left. He said over his shoulder that there was someone in the apartment building who was far more interested than an ex-cop who would put a bullet in his partner. Every word dripped with scorn. I wonder why Mary reacted like that when she saw him. He went up to the second floor, but he waited in the corridor for a while, unsure as to whether he should pay her a visit or not. It was then that he noticed a small envelope someone had dropped next to the bench in the hallway. It was addressed to Mary Reve and appeared to be from an insurance company. Instantly, Hyde thought back to the lump sum she had mentioned in their conversation. He knocked on the door of room 206. It was long before Mary appeared. As he went to hand her the envelope, he casually mentioned that it was from an insurance company. As soon as she heard those words, her expression changed dramatically. In a flurry of haste, she asked him to come into her room. Evidently, she didn't want anyone else to hear about this. This letter was apparently of great importance to Mary. She started to explain the situation to him. She told him that her husband had died in a car crash and that this letter detailed the amount of money she would be receiving from his insurance policy. As soon as she received that money, she would be able to pay her rent and move out. I wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was on her mind after talking about her husband, but without even being asked, she went on to reveal why she had decided to move into this particular apartment building half a year earlier. "It was somewhere where I was fond of. I met my husband here. It was quite a while back when Cape West was still a hotel." She felt that living there would help her keep the memories alive of the time she spent with her husband. Hyde simply stared at her as she relayed all this to him. This wasn't the Mary he was used to. He was surprised at having the image of her shattered so dramatically. This Mary was fragile and helpless. He started to feel like maybe he shouldn't leave her alone like this. Then she told him there was something else she wanted to talk to him about. She went off to get something and came back with a small piece of electronic equipment that fit into the palm of her hand. A bugging device. Mary suggested the only person who could have planted this bug was Rex. He had already got this impression from her reaction to Rex in the lobby, but now it was perfectly clear. Mary was scared of Rex. "Lately, wherever I go and whatever I do, I feel like I'm being watched. I only noticed him watching me about 3 days ago." Mary seemed quite desperate as she asked for his advice, and he reassured her that with a promise that he would talk to Rex on her behalf. Couldn't help but wonder, though, how Rex had managed to plant the bug. When he asked her, Mary wasn't sure, but she thought he might have done it around 3 days ago, when she first noticed somebody watching her. Anyway, regardless of how or when this device had been hidden inside her room, just thinking about it sent a chill down her spine, she said. Hyde had used bugging devices like this one in his days as a detective. He had attended seminars about the police's forces' use of them, and he had learned that the most important detail was where the bug was placed. And Mary had found it. That meant it had been placed rather carelessly. Had Rex broken and had been forced to bug the room as quickly as possible? Admittedly, Hyde had no proof that Rex would go that far. The other key question on his mind was why Rex was investigating Mary. For an answer to that one, he would have to ask the man himself. For now, he turned his attention to other matters. He decided to ask Mary what Cape West was like when it was a hotel. With a nostalgic glint in her eye, she told him all about how there weren't many rooms, but the hotel was famed for its impeccable service and mouth-watering food. Talking about the past like this seemed to calm her down completely, melting all the tension in the air. Mary's husband and brother had apparently both worked in the hotel. Hyde got the impression that this played a large part in why Mary cherished her memories of those days so much. He thought he'd try asking her about the incident that happened in the hotel 13 years ago. She said that she'd heard about someone being murdered there, but she didn't know any of the details. In fact, until he mentioned it, she wasn't even aware that the case was still unsolved. He also asked her if she knew anything about the Scarlet Star, but she simply shook her head. There were too many questions to count bubbling over in his mind. He couldn't find answers to any of them. What's his game, this Rex Foster guy? What's he trying to achieve? Until now, Hyde had usually tried to avoid getting involved with other people's problems, but this was one matter he couldn't just ignore. Rex was snooping around more than just Hyde's friends and relatives. He was investigating the other people who lived in this apartment building too. Hyde needed to find out more about this guy, and fast. Back in his own room, Hyde sat down on the sofa. Rex's name kept repeating over and over in his head. It was a moment or two before he noticed the hammer sitting on the table in front of him. It occurred to him that he never did give it back to Dylan. As if on cue, Dylan showed up at the door in search of his hammer. Having apologized for his forgetfulness, Hyde was about to close the door when Dylan asked him a strange question. I want to ask you if you noticed a shifty-looking man in sunglasses hanging around the building lately. He could only have been talking about Rex. Dylan suggested that, based on how he acted and the way he'd been looking around, Rex had to be an undercover cop. He had even been thinking about just going up and asking him. Dylan explained that he loved TV cop shows and thought it would be exciting to ask a real detective if he had any leads or secret tip-offs. I thought Dylan needed to grow a few brain cells. Secret tip-offs, huh? I've had more than my fair share of those. Got sick of them even. They're nothing an amateur like him should get so excited about. I gave Dylan a stern warning not to approach Rex. Dylan didn't look entirely happy about it, but he nodded, if reluctantly. While he was at it, Hyde asked, have you noticed anything unusual or out of place in the building lately? Dylan had noticed his radio reception had been bad lately. He doubted that Hyde meant something as simple as that, but he asked anyway. There's been a weird noise on my radio lately, like static. Is that what you mean? Hyde said that he hadn't noticed any particular problem with his own radio, though he realized that it had been a while since he last listened to it. Once Dylan had left, he instantly went and turned on the small radio he kept in the corner of his room. He used it so rarely that it wasn't even tuned into a station. All he heard was static. He tuned it in, and then he started to hear what Dylan was talking about. An odd sound was audible in the background of the song that was playing. Listening closely, he realized it was Sydney's voice. And this is being recorded in Lucky's cafe. Does that mean the cafe's been bugged? I guess he must pick up the transmission from the bugs by the radio. Just as he was heading off to give Lucky Cafes a once-over, the phone rang. It was Rachel. I've got an update on Rex Foster like you asked. He's 38 years old and appears to be a freelance insurance claim investigator. According to Rachel, the rumor going around was that people whose cases were looked into by Rex never received their payout. Hyde asked her to find out something else for him next. He needed information about Hotel Cape West. Deciding that he should tell her at last, Hyde explained that he had to leave his apartment before the end of the month. That happened pretty quickly. Tell me about it. Hey, while I'm finding somewhere, finding somewhere to live, maybe I'll just head over to your place and crash there in the meantime, he joked. Sensing from her reaction that he might have gone a little too far, he added a simple, just kidding. On that note, he headed towards Lucky's cafe. That wasn't like me, he thought to himself as he walked. I wonder what Rachel thought. If she didn't find it funny, it probably sounded like I was being really forward. He paused briefly in front of the door, preparing himself before he entered. As he opened the door, he remembered the prize draw the cafe was holding. He handed his completed crossword puzzle to Sydney. Thanks to Sydney's hint that the answers were all somewhere in the cafe, he had searched around and filled in all the blanks. He was pretty confident he had solved it correctly, and it turned out he was right. Sydney gave him an entry slip with the number 053 on it, and it told him that the prize draw was going to be held on December 23rd. The winning number was going to be posted up in the cafe. Apparently Sydney wanted the cafe to be full of excitement one last time. Hyde could hardly criticize that. Hyde asked Sydney where Mary usually sat when she came into the cafe. Sydney pointed him to a seat over by the Christmas tree. He carefully inspected the Christmas tree by Mary's seat. As he looked at each decoration one by one, he finally came across something that looked almost like a black branch. It was a bugging device, with its wire still attached. He took the device and left the cafe. At the lobby, he found Rex Foster, who even accosted him once. You've been targeting Mary Rivet, he thundered, and don't try to deny it. Rex just produced his usual wry smile. He didn't even bat an eyelid. Then Kyle produced the bugging device, and that wiped the smile off his face. Hyde was finally closing in on why Rex had been setting up bugs around Mary. So I can catch her out in a lie, Rex spat out at last. He said that she had always going around telling lies to swindle people out of their money. I'd asked him what precisely he was investigating Mary regarding. Rex fell silent. Hyde continued without missing a beat. I know all about you, Rex Foster. Finally realizing that his identity had been discovered, Rex admitted that he had been employed by the insurance company responsible for Mary's husband. All this was to gather evidence that Mary was committing insurance fraud. I'd remembered the forlorn look on Mary's face as she had told him about her deceased husband through a stream of tears. According to Rex, Mary had also received a substantial insurance payout 13 years ago when her brother had died, and her brother had died in a car accident, just like her husband. Suspecting fraud, the insurance company had hired Rex, and while he was investigating her, he had overheard some other interesting bits of information. I had asked if Rex knew anything about the murder that happened 13 years ago. Of course I do, he replied, with a patronizing smirk. Then you probably know about the Scarlet Star, too. The Scarlet Star? Exclaimed Rex. With a startled face as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, he said, Your father was the one who knew the most about that. Perhaps you should go and ask him. Whatever Hyde expected him to say, it wasn't that. What had his father known? What was his connection to the Scarlet Star? Unable to even respond coherently, Hyde just watched as Rex left the building. Mary's insurance fraud, the murder 13 years ago, the mysterious order sheet. There was a lot he still didn't know about this apartment building and its inhabitants. Hyde thought to himself he had got the feeling that it was too late. He was already being dragged in all of this complicated business, whether he liked it or not. End of chapter. Now let's open up the classifieds and see what's inside. Notes concerning Kyle Hyde, Part 3, Kyle's Tastes. The first impression you get of Kyle Hyde is that he is the strong silent type. He's 6 feet tall, looks slim but sturdily built, and seems awfully blunt and unsociable for a salesman. If you get to know him slightly better, he can be quite talkative, but he still won't say much about himself. Over the course of my research, however, I've been able to learn a certain amount regarding his likes and dislikes. His preferred attire is a sharp single-breasted suit, always in black. This is invariably accompanied by a white shirt with a collar that's slightly on the small side and a black skinny tie, loosely fastened with a small knot. His drink of choice is a straight bourbon on the rocks. He's not picky about the type of glass it's served in, but he'd prefer the ice cubes to be round if possible. He tends to eat out and in fact rarely cooks for himself, and while he doesn't demand a high-class restaurant, he does appreciate it when a chef pays close attention to the flavors of the sauces and the temperature of the food. As a rule of thumb, he does not accept presents from women, and if he were to receive one, it is likely that he wouldn't keep it for an especially long time. However, there is one noticeable exception, a ceramic piggy bank in the shape of the Pinky Rabbit cartoon character, which he hides away in his closet. Kyle received this curiosity as a gift from a young lady called Mila, and while he continues to put coins into it, he refuses to ever break it, and instead makes sure to keep it safe, no matter how unbefitting such a piggy bank seems of a grown man. The reasons for this are not entirely clear. I've been familiar with the method of retrieving the coins in such a situation. Instead of breaking it, you can insert something long and thin into the coin slot, and the coins will just slide out. I'm not sure if Kyle has ever used such a technique himself, however. I spoke to one person who knows the story behind the Pinky Rabbit piggy bank, Rosa Fox, a maid who had been worked in the Hotel Dusk for many years.
Mr. Hyde, as if I could forget him, December 28, 1979. That's when he stayed here. I remember the exact date. It's that Mila girl gave him that piggy bank. That day is when they first met each other, right here at this hotel. He really helped her out. That'd be why she gave him that piggy bank for his birthday. She wanted to give him something that showed how grateful she was.
Why a piggy bank, and why does it look like a pink bunny rabbit? Well, that's a bit more complicated, but it boils down to Mila being...
Why a piggy bank, and why does it look like a pink bunny rabbit? Well, that's a bit more complicated, but it boils down to Mila being such a kind-hearted little kid at heart. Mila remembered seeing him as watch a rerun of that little Pinky Rabbit cartoon in the hotel lobby, and she got lodged in her head that he was a fan.
Then she thought,
well, Mr. Hyde never has any cash, right? So if he has somewhere he can put all his loose change, he can save up. See how she got there now, right? She told me all about it. She searched high and low for that darn piggy bank. Every store in town had to be the exact right present for her to give to Mr. Hyde. Listening to Rosa's story, I learned that Kyle Hyde isn't quite as set in his ways as you might expect. He can be very considerate of other people's feelings, and sometimes his tastes change to reflect this. When she realized that I was researching Kyle's tastes, Rosa adopted a boastful expression and said, well then, Mr. Smart Guy, did you know that Kyle Hyde likes doing his laundry? I heard he won't let anyone else do it for him. You wouldn't get that from looking at him. You might think it's just that he's all particular about detergent because he sells household goods, but that's not it. Apparently he likes to put his clothes in the machine, then just sit in the laundry room and zone out while he waits for it to finish. Can't see what's so great about that, not for the life of me. It just smells of detergent. But you know, that's Kyle Hyde for you. To each their own, I say.
Subsequently, another of my interviewees brought up laundry in relation to Kyle. It was one of the residents of his apartment building, a young man named Charles Genet. I didn't see Mr. Hyde a lot, but I sometimes bumped into him in the laundry room. There were a few times I said hello to him, and we ended up having an unusually long conversation. Let me think about what we did talk about. That's it. Movies. Yes, we mostly talked about movies. I remember being surprised he knew so much about French cinema. Oh, and once we realized we both liked mysteries, we started playing detective a bit ourselves. People always used to leave things in their laundry room by mistake, so we tried to figure out who they belonged to. If I were to pinpoint Kyle Hyde's dislikes, I would say they include sweet alcoholic beverages, women who whine too much, and sorted out all the letters and junk mail that inevitably piles up in his mailbox. He also doesn't enjoy replying to the messages that have been left on his answering machine while he's been away on a business trip. Still, who can really blame him for that last one? My younger readers might not be aware of this, but the cassette tapes that those old-fashioned answering machines used had terrible sound quality and were very prone to breaking. Also, if you made a mistake in using the buttons, for example, by pressing play and fast forward at the same time, the tape would play back at very fast speed and it would become impossible to understand the recording. Incidentally, Kyle would be unlikely to even notice that the tape in his answering machine was getting worn out to the point that it was about to break. Perhaps, though, pretending not to notice is just his unique way of doing things. Alright, we'll call it there, so that's the end of Chapter 3, so I'll see you next episode for Chapter 4.